Where does your favorite NFL team rank after free agency? Welcome, football fans, to a new BLV NFL Power Rankings video. My post-free agency NFL Power Rankings, ranking every NFL team from the worst to the absolute best, 32-1. If that sounds good, spike the like button, and don't forget to not be a jabroni and subscribe to the only place on YouTube that covers all 32 NFL teams as deep as the bottom line view. That's right. This is the place to go. This is the place to be if you're a diehard NFL fan. So subscribe and let me know in the comments, because I love hearing from the fans. Let me know if I'm underrating your favorite team, overrating your favorite team, or if there's a team in general that you think is miscast or misplaced on this list. Let me know in the comments. Remember, guys, this is post-free agency rankings. A lot can change from here until the season, from even here through the draft. But this is how I feel about your favorite team entering the NFL draft. So let's begin with the worst team in the NFL, and I think there's a reason they're picking first overall. That's the Tennessee Titans. The main reason I have the Titans at 32 is not only do we know or don't know who their quarterback is, we're not exactly sure if they're going to go Cam Ward, although we kind of feel like they will. But if they don't, and they go Abdul Carter, we've got to sit through Will Levis again? Please, no. No, okay? But on top of that, the main reason this team is last is because I don't feel like they have a strength that I can point to. All the other teams in the NFL, I feel like there's at least something that gets me really excited about their team. The Titans just feel very below average in almost every facet of their team. And they feel like they are lost. Remember, this team fired Mike Vrabel. And then the year after, despite adding Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, L'Jarius Sneed, Ernest Jones, name after name after name, including one they just cut, Chidobe Awuzie. Name after name. They got worse as a football team. And now they've spent plenty of money to help improve their biggest flaw, which was their offensive line. I'm not sure if it's going to fix it because Dan Moore is extremely overpaid. And I love Zeitler. He is getting a little bit older. I will give them props for trying to fix the biggest issue. How far will that go is the question. They're trying to ensure their young quarterback, if it is Cam Ward, it at least gives him some protection. That's good. I look at their offense, though, and they really don't have a lot of weapons. Calvin Ridley is more of a high-end 2 than a 1 based on what we saw last year. And kind of overpaid. Don't know who their number 2 or number 3 receivers are at this point. They signed Van Jefferson. Okay, doesn't scare me. Treylon Burks, year 4 or year 5 breakout or whatever it is at this point. Good luck with that. Running back, Tony Pollard and Spears are pretty good. Solid combination, but again, not scaring anybody. Tight end Okonkwo, very athletic, but again, not inspired. I look at their offense. I don't love their head coach. I don't love their offensive scheme. Their defense played well above their heads last year, and they would have been an embarrassment if not for their defense. They were second, I believe, in yards allowed last year, or at least in the top 5, and they still were not very good at not allowing points. They still allowed a lot of points. Turnovers were a problem. Just overall rhyme, reason, identity, huge issue for this team last year, despite all of the talent that they added. So it feels like a fundamental franchise problem, an identity issue, a coaching issue. There feels something to be thoroughly wrong with this team. And I just don't believe in them. Their defense, I don't mind their corners if L'Jarius Sneed can play like L'Jarius Sneed, but we didn't see that last year. Safeties are not very good. They're missing probably one starting caliber safety, right? Linebackers, underwhelming. Interior defensive line is sweet. You have Simmons, you have Sweat, even Sebastian Joseph Day, but the edge position is not providing any pressure. Harold Landry moves on. Draymond Jones plugged in. Okay, I think he's better as an interior rusher than an edge rusher. So this team has a lot of holes and honestly just not a lot of strengths. And even if they bring in Cam Ward, sure, maybe they move up a couple spots. But I think the fundamental disbelief in this franchise is why I have them at number 32. At number 31, the New York Jets. Jets. This comes down to really two reasons. I don't believe in Justin Fields as a quarterback, as a starting NFL quarterback for a full NFL season. And I don't believe in Aaron Glenn as an NFL head coach. And really, it doesn't matter what they do. This team is not going to be very good for those two reasons and those two reasons alone, because if you have a bad quarterback and you have a bad coach, you're just not going to win in the NFL. The defense, I think, is somewhat a strength on paper. They still have two really awesome, fast, twitchy linebackers in Quincy Williams and Sherwood. Quinnen Williams is really good still. And they do have edge rushers like Will McDonald. Johnson's returning, so there's enough on the defensive line to get me a little excited. Sauce Gardner could have a huge bounce back, especially in a man coverage-based system instead of that zone-based system with Robert Saleh. Their safeties are not very good. And really, their corner depth is lacking now that DJ Reed left. So the defense is pretty good, but honestly, they're going through an entire scheme change, and that could dwindle their effectiveness. And I'm just not sure if they're going to be elite. And then offensively, they don't have a lot of playmakers outside of Garrett Wilson and Hall at running back. I like Allen too, but again, just running backs here. They let go of Conklin, who just recently signed with the Chargers. They don't really have great tight end play. The right tackle is a huge problem right now, and they're probably looking to draft that in the first round. The offensive line in general has an injured left tackle and kind of a mediocre interior. And again, this offense not going to score a lot of points. Honestly, if I were projecting who the worst offense in football was going to be, it probably would be the Jets. So that's why they're at number 31. A combination of a defense that's undergoing a scheme change, an offense that doesn't have a great quarterback and not really a lot to electrify. That's why they're second last. And honestly, after the draft, they could be last. I'm not denying that. If I buy into Cam Ward and I buy into what they put around him, I could move the Titans above them. At number 30, the Cleveland Browns. A lot of this has to do with the fact that right now their starting quarterback is Kenny Pickett. And honestly, I don't know if there's going to be a better solution here than Kenny Pickett. It could be Russell Wilson. Very small chance of that happening because it feels like Russ would rather go to Pittsburgh and New York. Maybe Kirk Cousins. But is Kirk at this stage better than Kenny Pickett? I mean, honestly, that's a question to be asked. Probably a little bit, but I don't know by how much. They just added another guard. So I'm interested. Tevin Jenkins was added. Are they moving Bitonio or Teller? That's an interesting question. They still don't have a left tackle. Their right tackle's always injured. I love Njoku, and I was very impressed by Jerry Jeudy last year, but I'm not overall impressed with their playmaking skill set. I mean, they don't have a great wide receiver 2 or 3. Cedric Tillman's interesting. Their running back position is thin without Nick Chubb in his prime anymore. This is one of the worst running back rooms in football. So I don't know where their strength offensively is. Is it running the ball? Is it throwing the ball? I like Stefanski. I like Schwartz. Their defense is awesome on paper. I still think it's very good. The combination of Myles Garrett and that cornerback group is always going to shine for me. But that defense has shown us that, yes, they're good. They're talented, but they can't carry this Cleveland team. So them and the Jets are very similar. Just no offense, a good, talented defense, but it's not enough, right? They're just stuck. At number 29, I have the New Orleans Saints. They just recently signed Brandon Cooks, the Archer. Good for them, good for him. I think this team is pretty thin on defense. They're going through a coaching change. Kellen Moore comes in. And I'm not sure if that's really going to help them. That could, potentially. Or it could maybe be a little bit of a transition season. So the way I look at it is, Derek Carr is mediocre. I feel like Derek Carr with a great supporting cast can bring you somewhere. But Derek Carr on a team that is not very talented overall is just not going to be the solution. So the Saints are stuck in this spot where, sure, they could win 6 games, but they don't have a huge upside, you know? The secondary is honestly at corner pretty pathetic right now. The safeties are older, but pretty good still. Demario Davis is still humming, but he's not quite the same player. Their linebackers are pretty solid. I don't love that they re-signed Chase Young. I'm not a huge Chase Young guy. I don't think he's a great example of what you want from a guy that's highly paid on your team. And their pass rush is still underwhelming. They didn't really solve that in free agency. Their offensive line, I think, is average. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I love their 2 receivers, Olave and Shaheed, and I love the speed they offer, and Cooks as well. I mean, that's a lot of speed there. But you're kind of changing the system that did work last year to an entirely new one. So that's interesting. You know, I feel like the Saints are just stuck in this weird no man's land. And again, like every single year, it feels like I'm a hater of this team, but they just have no clear direction. So I have them at 29 because I feel like this could be the year they just fall off because their older players just can't keep up. Like eventually Kamara, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, these guys, their wheels are just going to fall off and they can't keep up. And it's a transition year with a new coach, so most likely they won't be a very good team. At number 28, I have the Atlanta Falcons. And there's going to be some people that are like, Mitch, what? This team was close to the playoffs. They nearly won the division. And there's a lot of like outlets and people that are a lot higher on Atlanta, and I just don't get it. I personally don't. I mean, maybe you're a huge Michael Penix fan. I'm not at this stage. Maybe I have to do a deeper dive into what I saw last year. But I saw a somewhat erratic passer of the football, a confident athlete, a strong arm, but I'm not convinced. They lost one of their better offensive linemen in Drew Dahlman. Their receiving core, to me, like, I like London a lot. I like Mooney, but, like, it's not in the top 15 in the league. Kyle Pitts is just, I don't know. What is he? I don't know. The offensive line is above average, and I love Bijan, and they can run the ball a bit. But I don't love their offensive flair or creativity. I don't see much from it. I think this is an average at best offense. And then defensively, I think this is a bottom 10 defense. I don't love Raheem Morris. I think he might be the worst head coach in the entire NFL, and that includes the guys I've already talked about. So I look at Atlanta and I'm like, they have no pass rush still. They let go of a fundamental key leader in Grady Jarrett. Their interior D-line probably did get worse because of that. Their cornerback group is I mean, their safeties are I feel like Jesse Bates, AJ Terrell, they carry that back end, but they don't have a lot around them. It's just like, they feel like they have some players. Like in each spot, they have a guy that I like. I like their linebackers. Think they're underrated, but I feel like they lack depth. They lack an identity. They lack a lot, man. I don't know. I don't see how this team is in somehow, some way, shape, or form becoming this division winner all of a sudden. I just don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong. At number 27, I have the New York Giants, and some people may say, like, Mitch, their starting quarterback's Tommy DeVito. Well, obviously, I'm kind of baking in that their quarterback will be better than Tommy DeVito. So whether it's Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston, I'm ranking them at number 27. Even if it's, Aaron Rodgers would obviously help the most. But it's going to be one of those 3, in my opinion. So I'm kind of baking that in. So at number 27, I have the Giants. And I like what the Giants did this offseason. I honestly had to hold myself back from ranking them higher because I had to look in the mirror and say, well, they won like 3 or 4 games last year. So I couldn't get too excited about it. But, when I look at, they have the pieces, especially a lot of young pieces, right? They've got Malik Neighbors as their wide receiver 1. I like the complement of receivers around him, like Slayton to stretch the field and Wan'Dale Robinson on the short underneath route tree. I like Theo Johnson. I love Tyrone Tracy. And then I love Andrew Thomas as long as he's healthy. Right tackle Jermaine Illuminor has been one of the most underrated offensive linemen for years. Their interior is suspect, and I do understand that. But I feel like with better quarterback play, they can at least get average offense. Like, if they can get Jameis, well, bombs away, baby. If they can get Aaron Rodgers, well, that's going to bring a different level of precision to the offense. And with Russell Wilson, he just knows how to protect the ball and complement a good defense and occasionally spark a big play. So I look at all the potential quarterback solutions as better than Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, Drew Lock, or whatever they had last year. Plus, I believe in Brian Daboll still. Defensively, I think they're highly underrated. I like their interior defensive line led by Dexter Lawrence. I like the Roy Robertson Harrison pickup. I feel like Roy Robertson Harris, not Harrison, Rodney. You look at the edge, okay, you've got two really good players. I would say Brian Burns is really good. Then you've got Kayvon Thibodeau, who occasionally sparks some really good level of play. I like the Golston pickup. Okerike's in the middle. They don't have a bad linebacking core. And then you look at the corners, a huge upgrade with the Debo. I think their nickel corner already underrated. Javon Holland was a massive pickup for the defense that allowed the most explosive plays in football. He's going to eliminate that to a certain degree. Newbin enters year 2, right? They've got some guys on their defense that are going to develop, and I don't mind Bowen as the defensive coordinator. So I'll look at this staff as better and more mature and more experienced than the others below them. I look at this team as more well-rounded, more deep than others around them. I feel like they're underrated, and I kind of wanted to rank them higher. It's just I don't really know what to do with the current quarterback status. So at number 27, I have the G-Men. At number 26, Jacksonville. Jacksonville is here because I think they have a better quarterback than all the teams really below them, like Trevor Lawrence, and then I like Liam Cohen, and I think Liam Cohen could spark their offense. I also love Brian Thomas. I think they've got two interesting running backs, but you look at the offensive line, and it's pretty suspect. I think you would rank it in the bottom 5 in the NFL, right? They tried to fix it to some degree with Hainsey and Macari, but I'm not sure that it really does. They let go of Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk only to bring in De'Ami Brown, which isn't exactly exciting. Like, I like De'Ami Brown, don't get me wrong, but that's definitely a downgrade. Like, there's no doubt about it. If you're having to rely on Gabe Davis, hopefully not. Parker Washington's interesting. I'll give them that. But defensively, they were one of the worst defenses for a reason, and I don't know if they really fixed that. Like, their secondary is still not great, despite adding Jordan Lewis and Eric Murray. And their defensive front, I like their edge players, but their interior is rough. Their linebackers are pretty good, but the defense was so bad last year. The offense lost Lawrence, and the O-line couldn't have any consistency. There's not a lot to hang my hat on outside of I don't mind the quarterback. I like the coach. I like a few of their players. I think their edge rush is strong, and they've got a good receiver. Like, they've got enough to beat some of the worst teams. That's kind of how I look at Jacksonville, but they don't have a lot of potential right now. They need a lot from this draft class. At number 25, I have the Indianapolis Colts, which I struggle with because they arguably have the worst quarterback position in the NFL. Like, it's arguable, right? It's between them, the Jets, the Browns, and the Titans, and, whatever's going on with those other teams. But Anthony Richardson is just bad. And then Daniel Jones, I mean, I guess you could argue he brings a little bit more of a floor to the team, right? But again, then you look at the Colts and it's like their roster's pretty good. It's well insulated from, both lines of scrimmage are strong. I do think they got a little worse on the offensive line, but that was calculated. Their secondary got a bit stronger. And I think the biggest thing that helps me believe that they're not one of the worst teams is I just don't think they can be with Shane Steichen and Lou Anarumo. And I know that Lou Anarumo had a tough season with Cincinnati last year, but he's proven to be a very good defensive coach. And I think it will help that he has a lot more talent in Indianapolis, right? So I look at the Colts and I like the roster. I just hate the quarterback. And then the receiving core is really talented. I like Jonathan Taylor. And, I think the defense could be top half in the league. They won 8 games last year, somehow, some way. And the division sort of waters that down. Like, they're not exactly as good as what their record suggested last year. It was more so that they're in a really bad division. But at the same time, I still feel like they're better than the absolute worst because their roster overall is more well-rounded, more talented, deeper, and then they've got some decent coaching. So, yeah, their quarterback sucks, which keeps them near the bottom of the list, but I still have to respect the talent on the team. At number 24, the Carolina Panthers. The Colts have more talent than the Panthers. There's no denying that. But I look at the Panthers and kind of the belief in their building, and I view their offseason as a pretty positive one for the defensive side of the ball. They had one of the worst defenses of all time last year. I think actually, like, statistically speaking, it might have been the worst defense from a points perspective in NFL history or like something like that. They were really bad, but they added like 4 or 5 players that should start or contribute, and that definitely helps, right? At the same time, I think Bryce could take a big step. I am not a huge Bryce guy, and you guys know that, but I thought he was really impressive last year, and he did make me a believer to some degree. he is a smart player, and he's accurate, and he's on time, and he makes some off-schedule plays that impress me. And I look at Dave Canales, I like his vibe. I like the O-line a lot, and that really helps me believe in this offense because the O-line can protect and they can run the ball. And we showed that last year. Like, they showed that. So the receiving core, Adam Thielen still was balling last year. Jalen Coker's got my attention, and Leggett in year 2 could be better. I also wouldn't be surprised if they did add another playmaker at some point, rather in free agency or the draft. So I'm kind of baking that in. The defense, you get Derek Brown back, which is their best defensive player. J.C. Horn extended. If he can stay healthy, he's a stud of a corner. So you've got 2 cornerstones. I feel like their edge rush has improved with who they've brought in. Tershawn Wharton should help the front as well as Bobby Brown. And yeah, the linebacker position could use some work, maybe even corner, but I think Mike Jackson is a nice compliment to Horn. Trayvon Moehrig is interesting at safety. So I think the Panthers were a little bit better than people give them credit for last year, especially near the end of the season. They were really in a lot of games with Tampa, with Kansas City. They were hanging around. So I think Carolina should see an uptick in wins, production overall this year. So I'm kind of buying into a slight upgrade for their team. At number 23, the Las Vegas Raiders. Die Raiders! Geno Smith is really the reason I moved them up this much, because they were not this good last year. They were actually one of the more frustrating, boring teams last season because of their quarterback play. But the reason I'm not bought in is they still have so many holes. I think they're really counting on the draft. They don't have a wide receiver 1, in my opinion. Brock Bowers might be seen as a weapon 1, but they don't have an X receiver that dominates, so that will be a need for them. Jacoby Myers is good, but again, Trey Tucker is your number 2 receiver on the depth chart right now. That's not great, okay? Their offensive line is decent, but not great. Their running back room's one of the worst in the league right now. And as much as I like Chip Kelly and Geno Smith, there's just not a lot to work with, right? You've got Brock Bowers, you got Jacoby Myers, an average offensive line. You're not really running the ball too effectively. You need more on that offense. So it's at best a mediocre offense on paper right now. Defensively, I like the defensive line, but that's where my love for the defense stops. They need a lot at linebacker, safety, and corner. So they're a team that still needs to add a ton. And so this is a team that could really grow on me as the offseason persists. As it continues, we're going to see them add veterans to their defense. And that's where I'll start to be the Raiders. Because they do have fundamental key pieces that I think you can buy into. Geno at quarterback, Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, and, one of the more underrated defensive coordinators, in my opinion. Then you have Brock Bowers and Jacoby. You've got Colton Miller. You've got Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins, right? Even Jack Jones. I can buy into some of these pieces at every level, but I'm looking for that insulation and that depth. And it feels like they're just not there, which this weird part of the power rankings is kind of where I'm trying to differentiate between teams that have all this loaded up depth and, the quarterback solution and the identity, and the Raiders, it's just hard to know what they really are right now. At number 22, I have the Dallas Cowboys, honestly feeling a lot like the Raiders on this list because they have a quarterback that I respect, Geno, Dak Prescott. They've got kind of mediocre offensive lines. I'd say the Raiders are better than the Cowboys. They've got at least one weapon that I like, maybe even 2. Let's say for the Raiders, it's Jacoby and it's Brock Bowers. And for the Cowboys, it's CeeDee, obviously. And then even Jake Ferguson, I can respect to a certain degree. But then they have very weak running back rooms, very weak run games overall. Dallas tried to bring in Javonte Williams, and they tried to bring in Miles Sanders to replace Rico Dowdle, which I thought was an L. I don't know what that was. The tight end room, Schoonmaker's interesting. Ferguson's interesting. I think they're fine there. They need another receiver, whether it be in the draft or some sort of veteran. Maybe they bring in Diggs' brother there, but I feel like they're going to go draft for the receiver, maybe even really early. I could see Golden being a target from Texas. So I think they need a spark, speed, some sort of other player that can make something happen offensively for Dak. But Dak coming back obviously raises the floor of this team. Defensively is where I'm intrigued and I'm uncertain. I like Micah Parsons, obviously. I like their 2 corners in Diggs and Bland. I think Diggs could be better this year because he'll be healthier. I don't mind their safeties led by Hooker. The linebackers, they tried to address that. I just don't know if they really have any studs there. Overshown's one to watch, but he was injured at the end of last season. Their interior D-line still leaves something to be desired. Their lack of depth on the defensive end position is not my favorite, although I like that they brought back Fowler. It just feels like their defense is way too pass defense oriented. Eberflus has a lot to make up for in the run game department, and maybe they'll try to do that through loading the box. But this will be a heavy zone defense, relying on their pass rush, relying on a complementary passing attack. This is a new head coach, right? So you take away that floor that Mike McCarthy brings, and you've got uncertainty at head coach. So it could be a bit of a transition season for the Cowboys. But I think they have enough to not be bad, but they have kind of like not enough to be good. So that they're stuck in this no man's land where a lot of NFL teams don't want to be. At number 21, the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals are at 21. I actually thought they improved this offseason so far. I think the defensive line in general has gotten better. Dalvin Tomlinson helps them significantly against the run. He's been one of the best run stuffers in football for years. I think Josh Sweat gives them a competent, reliable edge rusher that can put up sacks. They just haven't had that in this Gannon era yet, and that helps significantly. I'm hoping they bring back Dennis Gardeck because I think he's super underrated, but Baron Browning as well will help as well. They extended him. He was nice for them last year. And it feels like their defense, like linebackers still kind of thin. Safeties are good. Budda Baker's still awesome, but how much longer will he be that? I feel like their corners are okay. I mean, Williams did have a really good year last year. You kind of wonder if Melton can develop and if SMB can hold it down. They might need another corner there. That's definitely not out of the proposition. The O-line, I think, is underrated in general. I feel like they have been the last couple of years. They coach that position really well. I love their tight end. McBride's one of the best in football. I love James Conner when he's healthy, and I even like their backup. And then they have some receivers, like Marvin Harrison Jr. needs to step it up. He needs to be more explosive, more consistent than his rookie season. I think he can be that. And then Greg Dortch is a guy I've always loved. Michael Wilson's interesting. I don't think they have a proper number 2, which also kind of hurts them, despite having McBride and Harrison. But that, again, is more than the Cowboys. I mean, that's more, in my opinion, than the Raiders have. Like, I think they've got more to work with from a skill talent perspective. And Kyler is a guy that could really have a bounce back year in the sense of like, okay, he's going to bounce back with his mobility. He's another year removed from an injury. Like, this could be a guy that could be a wild card this year. He could really have a breakout season into another degree. But the thing with Kyler is like, he's very roller coaster. He's up and down. He's all around. He has some great games. He has some really poor games. Some teams know how to scheme against him. Some teams really don't. Like, he just feels like a guy that I don't know if I can truly buy into. So the lack of like thorough, promising defense and kind of uncertainty with the offense leaves me to believe that they're kind of average. They're mediocre. They're stuck in a tough division. But at number 21, I've got the Cardinals. They're in that same Raiders, Cowboys type of tier, along with the next team, which is the New England Patriots. Now, I would believe in my Patriots a lot more if they had a left tackle and a wide receiver. I think this team, out of all the teams in this range, really up until like 16 or 15, I feel like the Patriots, the draft could really boost them the most out of any of these teams. Like, if we just plug Travis Hunter onto this team, that could totally change how I look at this team. If they get an effective day 2 tackle or, something like that, or if they could bring in Stephon Diggs, along with drafting, somebody, a wide receiver, a tackle, a defensive lineman, Abdul Carter. If they could have a huge difference maker gem in the draft in the first round at 4th overall, they could bring in a Stephon Diggs or bring in another nice veteran signing. They still have so much cap space. Like, the Patriots could really get still a lot better from what they have already. Like, and the thing is here is you're trying to project how much Drake May will grow, but it's hard to project too much growth without a wide receiver 1 and without a great left tackle. Like, that's really difficult to do. So, despite my belief in Josh McDaniels, I like the Morgan Moses pickup. I do think that the run game will have a bounce back due to Josh McDaniels. And I do think like Pop Douglas will be better. I do think like Kendrick Bourne off an injury could be a little bit better. I like Hunter Henry. I like what Austin Hooper brought. Like there's some pieces as complementary pieces. They just don't have the alphas. They don't have the dogs on offense to truly help Drake take that next step. But this team to me is a huge wild card because they have the absolute most potential to grow throughout the season because Drake May could be really that special. And then defensively, I mean, already without even the draft, I feel like they could be a top 5, top 10 unit thanks to the coaching they've brought in, but also the personnel. You're talking about Milton Williams, Harold Landry, Carlton Davis, Robert Spillane, players that I love. You know, Marcus Epps is a solid NFL pro. I think they've done a lot to really improve this defense. You've already got some really good players like Christian Gonzalez, Christian Barmore, Keon White, Jawan Bentley, Kyle Duggar. So the Patriots could have a really well-rounded roster, even if they don't have an explosive wide receiver one, if they could just hammer the draft effectively. So the Patriots could move up about like 8 spots by the end of the draft cycle. I mean, that's crazy to say, but they've already moved up about 7 spots. So that's why I have them at number 20. It sort of depends on where you currently see them. I just think their weaknesses on offense right now are holding them back from being any higher, like a potential playoff team right now. At number 19, the Miami Dolphins, who are just slightly above the Patriots, in my opinion. And it really comes down to, yeah, the Dolphins on paper are a little bit thinner and weaker on defense than the Patriots, but I feel like they still got some really good pieces there. Like, I think that their pass rush is super underrated. Their edge rotation is awesome. Like, Chop Robinson as a rookie was really effective. And they still have Zach Sealer. They have, Bradley Chubb back. We'll see if Jalen Phillips can make a full recovery. I thought that they picked up some effective linebackers as well. And then, yeah, they still have Jalen Ramsey who can hold it down. He's not quite the same player, but he can still hold it down. I do think their corner position is very thin. Their safety position is very mediocre, if not bad. And, they're missing a piece on the defensive front. So, yeah, they're kind of spotty. But with that sort of pass rush, you can still get by on defense, while they do have an offense that is pretty loaded at the playmaking spots. Like, you've got 2 speed backs in Achane and Wright. You've got Tua, who, when he plays, he's a good player. Like, he's a solid, in this offense, he's effective, right? You've got Tyreek Hill. You got Jalen Waddle. You bring in Nick Westbrook-Akine. I like that addition. Jonnu Smith was awesome for them last year. Like, you've got a lot of offense with this team. Now, maybe we could not be foreseeing a drop-off from Teron Armstead, right, at left tackle. That could be significant. Tyreek Hill at wide receiver, that could be significant. So maybe I'm not baking that in enough yet. And I think by the draft, after the draft, the Patriots will be ahead of the Dolphins. That's kind of how I see it. But right now, if I had to take one team to play tomorrow, I would just take Mike McDaniel's offense over New England and the half-baked offense that they currently have constructed. So at number 19, I've got the Dolphins. At number 18, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I think have done a really good job of insulating a potential quarterback addition. I think they've done a great job of adding their roster. They really don't have many holes. I think their offensive line is still below average, but they're counting on good coaching and player development at those spots. Otherwise, they brought in DK Metcalf to add another awesome weapon alongside George Pickens. Even Freiermuth, I think, is much more suited for a number 3 role. Some Steeler fans don't view it this way, but I like Jaylen Warren. I like Warren even as a lead back in the NFL. If you can complement him with maybe a rookie as his backup or another veteran, or even Cordell Patterson can get it done with Arthur Smith as a receiving back, a screen back, all that sort of stuff. And the offense under Arthur Smith should grow another season. I like how Washington at tight end fits in with the blocking stuff. I feel like the defense is one of the best in football. They've got TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. Cam Hayward was amazing last year. You wonder if he drops off. I like the safety position's actually better now. Juan Thornhill was brought in. Corner's better now. Darius Slay was brought in, right? So they brought in some quality veterans to support Joey Porter Jr., to support Minkah Fitzpatrick. Elliott was really good last year. Patrick Queen, I love Wilson at linebacker. You guys know that. So I think the Steelers, they have a top 10 defense. They have a supporting cast of an offense that could really make something happen. And perhaps they add Aaron Rodgers, which I think would... Honestly, like, the Steelers wouldn't really move much with Aaron Rodgers because I'm already kind of baking in. The thing with the Steelers is they're at 18. Like, I don't have them at 25. If I was purely basing it off of, okay, who their quarterback is right now, like Mason Rudolph or Skylar Thompson or whoever they would start, which would probably be Mason Rudolph right now. But if I were to go on based on that, I'd probably have them like 23 or 24 because Mike Tomlin earns that respect. Arthur Smith, the defense is that strong, and they've proven that they can win with Duck Hodges. Like, to a certain degree, they're still floating around 20 with a bad quarterback. But to me, like, I'm kind of baking in a Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers level quarterback. Maybe they would move up 1 or 2 spots. Okay, but that's kind of where I have them around here. So, yeah, I mean, I think Rodgers can make them a playoff team, and he gives them a lot of upside. I'm just also trying to predict and project ultimately what would happen at the same time. So at number 18, I have the Steelers. At number, not the Dolphins. We talked about you, Miami. Stop trying to sneak up, Tua. At number 17, the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the 49ers, I think, are another team that could move up after the draft because they have the most draft picks in the draft, and they picked the highest they've picked for a minute since, I think, the Trey Lance draft. So at number 11, they're going to get a really good starting player, rather on the offensive or defensive lines, most likely. The Niners, I see them as a top 5 offense as currently constructed with no further additions. Brandon Ayuk returning from an ACL, Brock Purdy. You got Ricky Pearsall, who I like and I liked in the draft, and I like what I saw late last season. George Kittle's still arguably the best tight end in football. You got Trent Williams returning. I think McKivitz by the fan base is poorly criticized. Like, he's not as bad as people think, okay? Their problems more so lie at left guard and center, but otherwise, you got CMC returning. You've got Jawan Jennings, who's coming off his best season of his career. You even added a Demarcus Robinson. You added a backup tight end. You still got Juice. You got, I like Garendo as a change of pace. So with Kyle Shanahan calling plays, that's probably a top 10, maybe top 5, top 3 offense. That's not out of the range of outcomes, especially with a healthy CMC. They could bust pipes on that side. But the defense is where I'm concerned. The defensive front is very thin right now with only really one NFL starter in Nick Bosa. Other than that, everybody else is a bit of potential upside, like Yetur Gross-Matos, or just guys, like, honestly, you know, like not Deshaun Elliott, but Jordan Elliott, like guys like that, right? And a lot is counting on Robert Saleh. Now, that being said, they still have Nick Bosa, Fred Warner. I think that Mustafa could be a real player. Lenore is awesome. I like Green a lot. He is being very underrated by the NFL at large. He was awesome as a rookie. And so I feel like they added some depth at safety and corner, like Trey Brown and Pinnock and Richie Grant and things like that. They need some guys to step up, like D. Winters at linebacker. They could be counting on him. Maybe even some rotation run defenders. But they just need a draft where they just hit on a couple defensive linemen, maybe an offensive lineman. They need to hit. But that being said, if they could do that, they could be back in the playoffs without question because they have the coaching. And I think their coaching will be a lot better than past seasons because I think Saleh is a head coach of the defense, which is something they have not had since 2022 with DeMeco Ryans. So don't discount the coaching upgrade they've had despite the personnel downgrade that might exist right now. With a good draft, the Niners could be back in the top at least 15, but we'll see what happens. Right now, they're not there because of the lack of defensive talent on especially the defensive front. At number 16, the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks just have overall more depth, more overall. I think their defense just looks a lot better on paper than the 49ers, and their offense is definitely weaker than the 49ers, but I see a vision. The offensive line is still a problem, especially their interior 3. I like their tackles to a certain degree, especially Cross at left tackle. Love their running backs. Kenneth Walker, is he on the trade block? Send him to New England. Thank you. But I like their running backs, Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet. Cooper Kupp should help as a complementary option to Jackson Smith and Jigba. My problem is, like, how are they both going to play together as slot players? Because they're both kind of slot inside players. I don't know how that's going to complement. We'll see. Is it a Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola? We'll figure it out. I do think Kubiak is an upgrade at offensive coordinator. And I do think Sam Darnold in this offense can be effective. But he needs protection. Okay? And then Valdez-Scantling can really run and make some plays down the field. And he's a nice complement to those underneath players. Defensively, though, I think they could be really strong because they've got two really good corners, one of the best nickels in football in Witherspoon, one of the better safeties right now, Julian Love. Ernest Jones insulates linebacker. Their interior is dominant. I think Murphy could be awesome. Leonard Williams is really, really, really good. DeMarcus Lawrence is a great pickup if he stays healthy. And I like overall their defense quite a bit. So that's why I have them at number 16, just ahead of the Niners. I think by the end of the draft, I think the Niners could be a little bit ahead, but it's very close between these two teams. At number 15, the Green Bay Packers are sort of clumped in with the Niners and the Seahawks. The Packers just have not done anything for me to be super impressed. I mean, Aaron Banks, I thought, was overpaid. It does improve them a little bit on offensive line and move and shift some pieces around. Like, they move their center, Elton Jenkins. He moves to center. But Christian Watson's out, so their receiver position just doesn't have that same pop or flair or excitement. I think, honestly, their biggest breakout next year could be like Tucker Kraft. I thought that he was really impressive last year. Josh Jacobs obviously brought a workhorse to their backfield, which was really impressive. Their run game was awesome last year. Matt LaFleur's a great coach. The defense, though, is just kind of mediocre, and they've got some really big weaknesses. Corner pass defense in general was a big weakness for them. They lost one of their better run defenders in TJ Slayton, which I thought was bad. I just need to see them do more. Maybe they'll add some veterans throughout July, June, August, that area, like a corner, like a Rasul Douglas or something, or like another pass rusher. They do have a whole draft to improve, and honestly, they didn't really lose a lot, so that could be some area where I'm looking after the draft, and I'm like, okay, I see what they did here. I like sort of how the defense is looking now. I see what their vision is, but at the end of the day, I just don't see like the high octane talent. Like, I don't see a ton of difference makers, a ton of game changers. And that's kind of my issue with the Packers, which is why they're just slightly above mediocre, in my opinion. At number 14, I have the Chicago Bears, which this is a lot of a projection. But this is, again, an offseason list, so I'm trying to project forward. And I'm looking at Chicago, and I'm saying I like Ben Johnson, so I'm not backing down on that. I love Dennis Allen as a defensive coordinator. Ton of respect for him. So I think you kind of got an upgrade on both sides of the ball. I thought Chicago, from a coaching perspective last year, was pretty bad, honestly. Then you look at the offensive line. I think they've entered the top 10 conversation with their interior three of Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney, and Drew Dahlman. And I think their tackles are already underrated in Wright and Jones. You've got a decent tight end in Cole Kmet. You've got an awesome wide receiver in DJ Moore. Rome Odunze should be expected to take a step forward, although I'm not the biggest fan of him. Running back could use improvement, but DeAndre Swift is fine. It comes down to Caleb and his development. And honestly, this could be where we get it wrong. This is where I'll regret having the Bears at 14, because I have not seen enough from Caleb for me to suggest that I should rank them here. I think Caleb is being overrated. But that being said, I'm putting my faith in the offensive line improvements. I'm putting my faith in Ben Johnson to get the most out of Caleb, because the guy does have talent. But I could be picking the wrong team. Maybe I should have New England here instead of Chicago, because I am more of a Drake May guy, but ultimately Chicago's done so much more to help their quarterback than New England, right? Defensively, I think Chicago is good, but not great. I do like some of their moves, like Grady Jarrett and Odenigbo. I think those help the defensive line, with Montez Sweat leading the way. And their linebackers are good. Their corners are young and feisty, and their safeties are solid. So I think at number 14, Chicago just doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And if they can get a little bit more from their quarterback, they could be a playoff team for sure. At number 13, the Cincinnati Bengals. I have the Bengals. Some people will love this. Some people will hate this. I think they're in a good spot, though, because I think we're still baking in some disbelief of the defense while also understanding that they have the best passing game in football. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are signed up. Mike Gesicki returns. That is one of the most dangerous trios in football. I love Chase Brown. He's one of my favorite running backs. I mean, I called the breakout last year. I was correct about that, but at the same time, I love watching the guy play. He's even better than I thought. The offensive line could use some improvement. They did add Lucas Patrick. I don't know if that really helps. They need to hit on some linemen, rather in the draft or in the offseason, continuing to address the guard positions, okay? But the tackles are fine. I think especially, you got Orlando Brown and Marius Mims, and center is good. They need left and right guard, and they probably need one more pass rusher, one more corner, and we can talk about playoffs, right? Because I think the Bengals were extremely unfortunate and unlucky last year in a way that I've seen very few teams in NFL history. So even if they just make this defense from pathetic to like interesting, I feel like they'll move into a playoff position. It's that simple with Joe Burrow. At number 12, the LA Chargers. I'm not as big of a believer in the Chargers as other people because I'm not as big of a Harbaugh guy as other people maybe, but I like Harbaugh. I mean, I'm even a fan of Michigan, but at the end of the day, I just think like his style of coaching is somewhat outdated. Like I think he's a good leader of men and he's a good coach, but I don't think he's like one of these coaches that's a true utter like just game changer. Like I think he's in the next category of coaches, which is still phenomenal, but I think people talk about him like he's Andy Reid. He's just not. You know what I mean? I like Minter as the defensive coach. Greg Roman's still like, I'm not a huge fan of him, especially in a Justin Herbert-led offense. But I don't think they've done enough at playmaker despite adding Ty Conklin today. I think that does help to some degree, but he's basically another Will Dissly, maybe a little bit better. The offensive line has improved. I think they've added depth to center with Andre James and guard helps with Becton, but that was a huge deficiency in the playoffs. We saw the Texans just destroy them up front. That was embarrassing. So I do think the offensive line insulation from the interior will help. Running back, I think slight improvement just based on consistency with Najee, but explosiveness did take a hit because Dobbins is more explosive than Najee. Wide receiver, Mike Williams should help a tad bit, if not only for just red zone production, but they need another receiver for sure. Maybe the draft. We'll see. Maybe Keenan Allen. We'll see. But Ladd McConkey's a stud. Defensively, I think they're okay. Like, I think their defense is overrated. I like some of their young players. I love their safeties. I think their linebackers are underrated. But, like, their edge, they did lose Joey Bosa. I mean, they did. You know, Khalil Mack's getting older. They did have a breakout there last year. Defensive line, they did lose Poona Ford. You know, like... I don't know. Like, I think their defense, like, very well coached, very well schemed, but they benefited from a very weak schedule. Let's not forget about that. So at number 12, I have the Chargers just because, like, I feel like they just feel a little overrated right now. I just need to see more at key spots. Like, I don't know, man. I just don't know right now. At number 11, the Houston Texans. I just can't get out of my mind how the Texans just absolutely terrified and terminated the Chargers in the playoffs. So I can't really have the Chargers ahead of the Texans. They did sign Trent Brown today, which, by the way, I think that is a great signing for Houston. I think that is a low-cost, high-upside option. Trent Brown has played really well for my Patriots in the past. It's a matter of motivation and health with him. He's coming off a really bad injury, though. We'll see if it works out. But 1 year, like $3 million or whatever, he's a starting left tackle if he's healthy. So that's a great move. And they also brought in, another tackle in Cam Robinson. So I think their offensive line, they're starting to get some pieces together. Maybe even Trent could play the right side. That could even be better for them. But, I look at Houston and I'm like, okay, I kind of see their vision now. Their defense might be the best in the league, as I broke down in a previous video. Thank you guys so much for the support in that. I don't really need to break that down further, but I just love their complement of, a well-rounded defense that can cover, only getting better in that area with improvement at safety, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, right? And then at corner, Ronald Darby. They've got the athletic, fluid linebackers led by the crazy Al-Shaair, as long as he doesn't suspend himself. And then the defensive front is one of the deepest and best in football. Their pass rush is ridiculous. CJ Stroud has been my guy since day one. I think he's a baller, and if he gets a little protection, he'll be a beast. I think that Mixon still can play, although getting older. Nico Collins, one of the best receivers in football, on a short list of 5, probably. And I think that Kirk is a nice 2. Tank Dell will be that 3, maybe even the 2 once he comes back, but that's a long ways away. So I think this team has AFC Championship upside if they can figure out the offensive line, because I love Stroud, and I think that he will have a bounce back this year if he's protected. But it's a big if. They have a new offensive coordinator. We'll see if that helps. Nick Caley, former Patriot guy as well. I think Nick Caserio is making the right moves. I think Nick Caserio is the most underrated GM in football right now. I really do. Jason Light, I think, is getting his love, and that's where we're going to transition to number 10. Also, one of the best GMs in football. Tampa Bay is underrated, I think. Like, if you really look at it, they won their division last year. I thought they finished the season strong despite an injury to Chris Godwin that was just stifling for their offense. And Baker was balling. I mean, he was a top 5 or 6 quarterback last year. And yes, they lost Liam Cohen, which concerns me. And Todd Bowles is not my favorite head coach. He does have his moments as a defensive coach, but I just look at this team and I look at the roster and I look at everything that I need. Their O-line is above average. They've got arguably the best left tackle in the entire NFL. They have a center entering year 2 that I adore. They've got 3 receivers. Even if Godwin is not quite the same, Evans, McMillan, and Godwin is special. Sterling Shepard was even good last year as a 4. And then you've got Bucky Irving, who's explosive out of the backfield. Rachaad White's one of the better third down backs. Then you've got Cade Otton at tight end, who kind of well rounds the room around, right? So I mean, how much of a job does this OC really have when you've got all those weapons and you've got Baker running the show? And it should be very similar to what they installed last year, right? And the O-line's completely the same. The cohesion and chemistry is through the roof. The belief with the Bucs is through the roof. That, like, it stemmed from the Tom Brady era where they just believe they're the best in this division. And then defensively, I think they'll only be better this year because I think they'll be healthier. Like, guys like Antoine Winfield, I don't think he'll miss as many games, just period. Levante David is ageless, so I'm not concerned. I actually like the Walker pickup quite a bit because he's a good coverage player beside him. They're actually very close, I've heard. Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey the entire season will dominate. I think Yaya Diaby could have another breakout this year. And Hassan Reddick adds a little bit of spice to the pass rush, the finesse and speed that they didn't have. Even if it's just third down, they need that. Because if you look at last year, they finished strong. And they lost to the Commanders in a really close game. And honestly, if they don't fumble the ball, like, I feel like they would have won that game. And the Commanders ultimately went on to beat Detroit, which I don't think it's crazy to say that the Bucs could have beat Detroit in the same scenario because they beat them earlier in the year, and Detroit was very beat up on defense. And Todd Bowles done a good job against that offense. So I kind of feel like the Bucs would have won that game too. And all of a sudden, we're talking about a Bucs team against an Eagles team that they beat in the regular season, and that might have been a closer game than the Commanders had, them played. If you really think about the Bucs last year, like, that's kind of where I'm going to here. Now, are they a little older in certain spots? Yes, but they don't really have a lot of holes. Like, I think if they can fix the middle of the field coverage, a little bit more spice in the pass rush, which they've kind of already added, they add another draft class, they could be a top 7, top 6 team. And I wouldn't be that surprised. But for now, I have them at 10 just because they haven't really added a ton yet. At number 9, the Denver Broncos, who I think this is about as high as I could potentially put them. But this is me showing belief in Sean Payton and Vance Joseph. And I just like what they've done. Like Hufanga, Greenlaw, that kind of rounds out their defense. Their defense was top 3 or 4 last year, and it's even better with those 2 ballers. So now they really have no weaknesses. Zach Allen's dominant inside. DJ Jones, a big run stuffer. John Franklin Myers is underrated. Nick Benito is unbelievable. I love that guy. I've loved him since he was drafted. Linebacker is super improved with Dre Greenlaw, who might as well be Superman out there. Then you got Pat Surtain, who's the best corner in football, arguably. And then you've got, the safety combo of Hufanga and Jones. If they can stay healthy, they're feisty. So, yeah, this defense, top 5, complements an offense that's well schemed. They've got a good offensive line. They should improve through the draft, rather with another playmaker or I would say another playmaker, whether it be a running back or a receiver. I think they're going to add something for Bo Nix, who's entering year 2. Now, maybe Bo Nix just doesn't get a lot better. Maybe teams start to figure out Bo Nix a little bit more. Maybe their defense declines and doesn't quite play at the same level, and maybe they're injured more, and that's what... And in a tough division, that's what kind of adds up to missing the playoffs. But I think you could equally see the upside and equally see the growth that this team could have, considering still a draft class to come. At number 8, the Minnesota Vikings are absolutely stacked. So I don't really care who's playing quarterback. J.J. McCarthy, Jameis Winston, Aaron Rodgers. I don't care. Their O-line, like, all of a sudden has erased weakness at guard and center, which is really where they lost the final couple games against the Lions and the Rams. They have arguably, one of the best receiving corps in football, led by Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison, the Suns. Then you've got Jones and Mason in the backfield, Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores as the coaches, Hargrave and Jonathan Allen on this D-line with Harrison Phillips. And, Harrison Smith is back, and you brought back your Murphy at corner, and you're going to have another draft class. We'll see what they do at corner. That's kind of their one weakness, but their edge rotation is awesome, and Dallas Turner could take another step, and they could use him in more unique ways this year. This defense is top 5. The offense is probably not top 10 just because we don't know what JJ is going to be, but from a complimentary perspective, they're top 10. They're top 3 or top 4. So, yeah, I mean, the Vikings are sweet. Their roster is stacked. At number 7, I have the Commanders. I'm a little concerned. I kind of foresee a downgrade for the Commanders this year, and I'm not willing to predict it because Jaden Daniels he's just proven me wrong so many times so far that I just can't really persuade myself to do it again. Because now the thing is, like, can Dan Quinn get more out of this defense? Because if their defense doesn't play well again, I mean, that could be the reason they fall apart because they won so many one-score games. They were kind of a miracle team last year, and those teams usually don't age well. And I know that they've improved with Laramie Tunsil and Deebo Samuel, but I'm not the biggest Deebo guy at this point. And I don't really feel like the defense is super improved. They've added a lot of pieces and guys that I really respect. I mean, nobody respects Jonathan Jones more than me. Dietrich Wise, I mean, some of these guys, but they did lose Jonathan Allen. They did lose Dante Fowler. That's not exactly great. You know, their corners, maybe they got a little bit better, but their safeties maybe got a little bit worse. Bobby Wagner's not getting any younger. Frankie Louvu's not getting any younger. Like, they brought in a lot of veterans last year to help prop this team up. There could be issues with Laramie Tunsil with the flags, but that should really help them. Like, your belief really comes down to they're going to score 25 to 30 points a game. Jaden's going to be dynamic. Terry McLaurin's still playing awesome. Debo's going to help a little bit. And they're going to roll on offense, and they're going to complement on defense, and they're well-constructed from their coaching staff. And they've got another draft class, okay? So that's where I'm kind of like, yeah, I've got to buy in. But, man, if this team made the NFC title, I wouldn't be surprised. If this team missed the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, that's kind of where I'm at with them. And maybe that's controversial, but that's why I have them at 7. At number 6, the Detroit Lions. I feel very good about their roster and their talent and Dan Campbell's identity and culture, but I feel very uncomfortable about their coordinators and coaching staff. I just don't know if this will be the year where they drop off because of a lack of creativity with Jared Goff, where Goff could maybe not be the same player. Their O-line could maybe be a little bit different. Their run game could be potentially less dynamic. I'm concerned about no Ben Johnson. I'm also concerned about losing Aaron Glenn because he kind of brought this identity to this defense. And despite not being a huge fan, I'm more concerned about Ben Johnson for sure. But I feel like he was well respected for a reason, and he kind of got some bad players to play better than they are. And Detroit's defense has never been looked at as extremely talented. Maybe these players are a little bit overrated because of what Aaron Glenn was able to get out of them in his system. So we'll see how that goes. But you really look at it, and the O-line is dominant on paper. Yes, they lost Zeitler. We'll see if they replace him. They've got ballers. I mean, Amon-Ra, Gibbs, even Montgomery, who I'm not a huge fan of, but he's still good. Sam Laporta had kind of a down year last year, but he's awesome. I mean, Jameson could have another step this year. He is sweet. I love him. Defensively, Aiden Hutchinson was Defensive Player of the Year. That's kind of what's, like, keeping me, right, is, like, they lost him, and they were still pretty darn good down the stretch. And I know they got embarrassed in the playoffs, but Aiden Hutchinson might have been their best player last year. He's back. McNeil's back. Their linebackers are awesome. I love Jack Campbell. I love Brian Branch. Reed and Carlton Davis, that's fine. It's a fair swap. I think that the Meek Robertson pickup last year was savvy, and they've got him still. So I just think their roster is so good that it's hard to really fall off. Maybe they fall off a little bit, like they're not the number 1 seed, but they're still a playoff contender, and maybe they're a little healthier, which helps. But ultimately, I'm a little afraid, kind of like the Commanders. At number 5, I'm a little scared for the Chiefs too, because they've lost some pieces. They are going for now like a 4-peat situation where if they want to win a Super Bowl, they'll have to get there again, right? Which is like crazy. It's just so hard to do, especially after losing a Super Bowl. The Super Bowl hangover is real. Mahomes has not played his best football over the last 2 years, and their offensive line is kind of pieced together. Their left tackle is inexperienced, but they signed Jalen Moore from the Niners. He does have upside. Left guard is suspect, losing Joe Tooney. They lost a leader on defense in Justin Reed. They did get back Charles Omenihu. They did get back Nick Bolton, some pieces on the front seven, but I think the D-line does need improvement, rather at D-tackle or D-end. Linebackers are good. They're still the same. Secondary will be good, led by Trent McDuffie. Kelsey's, I don't know. But Rashee Rice will really help the receiving core. And all of a sudden, this is Mahomes' best receiving core in like 5 years. Probably since Tyreek Hill, to be honest. If you really look at it on paper. You got Hollywood for a full year. You've got Rashee. And you've got Worthy, who's also getting in trouble, but I think he's okay. I don't know. Running back could also be healthier. Pacheco could be a bit more explosive, but I wouldn't be shocked if this team just kind of I don't want to say gave up, but the wear and tear just wore on them. I wouldn't be shocked if they were actually, and the other side, I wouldn't be shocked if their offense was actually more fun to watch, actually better, but they don't quite get it done at the same level in the playoffs just because they just run out of gas. Maybe they get hurt or something. So this team has a lot of wild cards. I think some people are underrating them. Some people are overrating them. It's hard to find common ground with this team. At number 4, the Los Angeles Rams, who seem to be everybody's favorite choice out of the NFC right now. And I understand it. I'm looking at this depth chart every day and I'm like, okay, what am I missing? What am I missing? And it kind of clued in to a certain degree where it's the defensive front is really young. They're all in their prime. And yes, the linebacker position needs a lot of help. But I feel like the defensive line and the edge position, Kobe Turner, with Jared Verse, with Fisk, with Young, that's a really good pass rush. And you have complementing that, an underrated secondary. I feel like their safeties don't get enough love. I think Witherspoon played really well at the end of last year. They brought him back. Darius Williams is a veteran, a very solid pro as a CB2 or whatever. Guys like Lake, guys like Kitchens, they're solid, okay? I kind of struggle to see this defense as an elite unit because I think they're slow, and I feel like they're not great in the second and third level, but they're underrated to a certain degree. But then you have an offense where Stafford's on his last run. They're going to try to do everything and pull out all the stops. You got Devontae and Puka, which is so tough to defend. You've got the McVay run game and an offensive line that I think is top 10 in football too. So you've got a really well-balanced offense. And as long as everyone can stay healthy, which is a big if with older guys in some areas, Puka Nacua in general, right? Kyron for a third straight year at his size. But on paper, the Rams have the experience, the coaching. Shula was great for them last year, and the quarterback to really make a run, right? Stafford can duel with anybody in this conference. So at number 4, I have the Rams. At number 3, the Ravens. PFF had the number 1, and I honestly don't really disagree too much. I think they haven't really proven to get better, though, which is why I can't put them that high, because they haven't really done anything to improve. I mean, wide receiver, sure, they added old man DeAndre Hopkins. Other than that, I'm not impressed with what they've done. They haven't done anything. But that being said, I look at their interior defense, and I'm like, Matabike and Travis Jones is pretty sweet. Kyle Van Noy is still playing and balling. Owe, I want them to add another edge. Roquan's in the middle. Kyle's at safety. Marlon Humphrey's coming off his best year. That being said, he could get hurt because he just always does. Wiggins, year 2, is going to take a big jump. I really liked him in the draft, and I thought he played well as a rookie. Their O-line, I thought they're good. They got Ronnie Stanley back. Maybe they'll add a left guard, but otherwise they're pretty solid. They've got their 2 tight ends, and Andrews should be healthier entering the year, although old. Likely is a stud. Flowers is a stud. Bateman is solid. Henry's still Henry, and I won't discount him ever falling off at any point. But this could be the Ravens' year. If they can add another good draft class and maybe a couple of veterans in free agency, which they always do near the end of this cycle, like June, July, August, that's where the Ravens go bargain hunting, and they always pick up a Calais Campbell or a Kyle Van Noy or a Ronald Darby, and it just rounds out their team. Those are the type of players they brought in. They're looking for that type of player again. If they added Von Miller, I wouldn't be surprised. So the Ravens at number 3, they could be top 2. They could be 1 by the end of this offseason. At number 2, the Buffalo Bills, just slightly ahead of the Ravens. They did beat the Ravens in the playoffs, but I think they just did a little bit more than the Ravens. You've got Josh, obviously, a receiving core where Josh Palmer over Mac Hollins, I'd say that's an upgrade slightly. They were able to extend a lot of their key players like Shakir, right? Bernard, right? These guys that are key fundamental to their success. They have one of the best O-lines in football. They have one of the best tackle combinations in football. They've got one of the best running backs in football. I like their tight end room, and Kincaid still could take another step. Still waiting for that. Coleman could take another step in year 2. That's another guy to watch out for. Defensively, I think they'll be better this year because I think they're going to have a draft Plus, they brought in good depth to the defensive front. Joey Bosa, Ogunjobi, Hoyt, along with what they already have in Rousseau and Oliver. And those guys, right? Daquan Jones, Epinesa, etc. Milano for a full season, playing at his best, along with Bernard, is awesome, okay? Safety, I think they could still add. Corner, they could still add, but Benford and Teron Johnson and Cam Lewis is not a bad start. So I look at this team and I'm like, they're very well-rounded. They're very well-constructed. They have a superstar quarterback. They have a great offensive line. Their D-line could be the best it's been in a couple of years. And they do have a CB1. They have good linebackers. They have everything McDermott really needs. He just needs to kind of... They need to nail one more draft and they could raise the Lombardi. So at number 2, the Bills. At number 1, the Eagles. I'm still giving them that respect and admiration as the team that won the Super Bowl. I do think they declined a bit, but they were so dominant. I mean, in the Super Bowl, like they were clearly the best team last year. So that does go for something, right? But they might have slightly declined at guard. Becton to Steen. That's one area of concern to a certain degree. They lost Gainwell, but they added Dillon, so it's whatever. I think actually like Dillon is probably better for like if Saquon were to miss a game, Dillon can carry the load more, if that makes sense. But wide receiver, you've got A.J. Brown, you've got Devontae Smith. It's one of the best combos, if not the best in football. It's probably second behind only the Bengals, but I mean, they're awesome. And then Dotson actually showed up in the playoffs. Maybe he could grow a little bit and potentially as a third receiver, right? Goddard's a stud. Will they trade him? That's something to look out for. Lane Johnson, that guy's ageless. Mailata, that's the best tackle combo in football. You've got a really good guard in Dickerson. Like the roster's ridiculous. The offense is sick. They've got the best running back in football, Saquon, entering next year. Can he continue that though? I guess that's a little bit of a question. Like health will always be a question about a running back, and that could derail a team. But I feel like we're just going to not go that way. Defensively, they did lose Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, which are huge, right? CJ Gardner-Johnson, also very big. But they did do some work to kind of reclaim some depth. Josh Uche is really intriguing. I've always liked his skill set. He just never really found a complete home outside of 1 year in New England. Ojulari, I've also liked as a pass rusher. Nolan Smith could really develop this year. Jordan Davis could really develop this year. You've got guys like some younger guys as well on defensive line and edge position. I'm not recalling their names for a second here. But is it Hunt is one of them? And then I forgot his name. It's a defensive tackle. But they've got some young guys in the inner workings here that could really develop and play key roles next year. Then linebacker, they do need a little bit of help, which I think they'll add. Howie's a great GM. They're rather going to draft that or they're going to add that in free agency. Bond is awesome. Safety, I think Blankenship's underrated. They need another safety. Corner, Adoree Jackson can definitely fulfill, that Slay spot, but you just wonder if they do have one weakness that teams can pick on, if that's enough, for them to kind of derail from being the best defense to being like the 6th. You know what I'm saying? But Quignon and Cooper, they're going nowhere and they're only getting better. So Quignon could be like defensive player of the year type player, I think. Either one of them, to be honest, the white boy. But yeah, that's your number 1 team. They were the champs for a reason. They're sticking there for now. Thank you guys for watching. Those are my power rankings. All 32 teams in the NFL. It's Mitch. Gronk, spike the like button if you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't be a jabroni. Peace.